So you all missed it, but when Don's friend Dan was over, we're playing games, and Dan is like, you two don't really look like you're friends or sound like you're friends. He's like, if I didn't know Don was like a really sarcastic person, he's like, I would not think that you two liked each other at all. Which is a sidebar to the discussion, but anyway, just something that popped in my mind when we were talking about when Don was complaining about how passive aggressive I am. Anyway, today's portion is called Korach. We are in Numbers 16, 17, and 18. And in this portion, oh gosh, everyone's we see Korah. Anyway, the person who the portion is named after, he kind of ends up rebelling against Moses. He says, you have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? Korah and his co-conspirators and they and their families end up getting swallowed by the earth. So that probably sounds familiar. And then some of the other people who were following Korah, they get burned up by fire. And then some of the Israelites start complaining, like, why would you do this to us? And then this plague starts out and breaks out among the people, and Moses is like, Aaron, you gotta go offer some incense and make it better. And then to try and reassert Aaron's authority, the 12 a staff from every leader of the tribe is taken and they're all put into the tabernacle. And the next day Aaron's staff has like blossomed and having flowered and grown and blossomed and produced I think almonds. And yes, so a lot happening in this portion. So does any of this sound familiar to people, and what have you heard about this in prior? Has no one heard about Korah before? This is all new to everyone. Is that passive aggressive? Don, I'm gonna be very self-conscious now. God dang it.
Other than, making jokes about staffs flowering, I actually have nothing because I'm not familiar with this passage.
I would second that.
I think David said seconded, but I can't be certain. I'm trying to read it, so that's why I'm quiet.
Okay, so I'm gonna start and I'm going to read a bit between chapter 16 okay, I'm gonna, oh gosh, sorry, hold a second, something messed up from my reference. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm going to read 16. If you won't go down, I'm gonna read verse 35 through 38. So as background, Korah had 250 followers, and to help distinguish between whether they were just as holy as Aaron, they all offered incense in their censers, and this is what ends up happening. So 35, and the fire came out from the Lord and consumed 250 men who were offering the incense. The Lord said to Moses, tell Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, to remove the censers from the charred remains and scatter the coals some distance away, for the censers are holy, the censers of the men who sinned at the cost of their lives. hammer the censers into sheets to overlay the altar, for they were presented before the Lord and have become holy. Let them be a sign to the Israelites. So what we see here is people offering incense to God, having fire come out from the Lord and kill them, and then having the censers that we use being declared holy. So does that scenario, well, when I read through this, that scenario of offering incense to God and having the fire come out from the Lord really reminded me of Nadab and Abihu from Leviticus. And does anyone remember who Nadab and Abihu are?
They were
Eleazar's brothers.
You know what? I didn't understand that because two people were talking. So try again, y'all.
I was gonna say Eleazar's brothers.
So sons of Aaron, yeah.
I think it's funnier that it's Eleazar's brothers, and this is the second time now he's had to deal with a fiery mess with incense and altars.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It sounds like Eleazar's kind of cursed or something. Okay.
Lee, why does God do that?
Why does God consume people?
Why does God in this instance consume 250 of Korah's people when they're just trying to ask for equality and equity before God?
What makes you think they're asking for equality and equity?
Because they're asking why Moses is deemed higher than the rest of the people, and why Moses has special privileges that the rest of the Israelites don't have.
And do you think some of these people might have special privileges that other Israelites don't?
Can you say it again?
So Korah was a leader, a respected person in his tribe. He himself was a Levite, and so raised above other Israelites. And the 250 men, it doesn't specify which tribe, looked up to by other Israelites. So did they have privileges and power and influence that that a common Israelites not have?
actually they did, because they had the service of the tabernacle. So they're the ones who took the tabernacle down, transported it, and did all of that. And the other Israelites did not have that privilege.
I'm just trying to counter your questions with other questions, Don.
I know.
Didn't they? Okay, let me ask you this. If all right, so we talked about Nadab and Abihu. Okay, so they took unauthorized fire, and one of these folks have had to do the same thing. Okay, so they took unauthorized fire and offered it, just like Nadab and Abihu.
So so if you compare some of the verses, so the idea of strange fire appears in Leviticus with Nadab and Abihu, but it doesn't appear, that Hebrew word does not appear in Numbers. So part of me wanted to start looking at those two verses, but I really like Don's questions. Right, because we're was what Korach and his followers looking for? Was it equality and was it equal rights? Or were they looking to be more powerful and to have more prestige?
Well, what would make you think that?
Because part of what I see in this portion is who does Korach compare himself to? And I guess in turn, who do we compare ourselves to? Like, Korah goes and looks and says, why do I not have as much? Why am I not as holy and as set apart as, Moses or Aaron? And he seems to forget that he's set apart from the rest of the Israelites. By being a Levite. So does he, while he's asking, so is he really asking that everyone have the power and prestige and influence of Moses, or is he asking for people to be deferring to him? In the prior portion, we saw Moses ask that his spirit be shared among leaders and shared among 70 people, right? So is Korach, upset that he wasn't, somehow chosen as one of those 70? And we see in the prior portion, one person from every tribe is sent to go be a spy, to go and investigate the land, and Korah is not one of them. So is he upset that he wasn't chosen for that leadership position? And wrong button. So who is Korah, comparing himself to, and what is his intent and motivation for this?
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
So, Lee, why do you think that this is the only instance outside of maybe the flood or the Red Sea that nature does the smiting, so to speak? But I believe, if I'm correct, the other ones God commands it, like God sends the rain, and God closes the sea. But in this instance, I don't think that there's an indication that God causes the earth. The earth seems to do it on its own will. And so I'm curious what you think is the Israelites would have learned or understood about this, based on the fact that God sends out the fire that consumes the 250, but the earth swallows Korah.
So
and maybe it's up to the whole floor for everyone to.
Yeah, I would say that part is that in this portion, or in verse 28, it's Moses who says, like, this is how you will, kind of, as we've seen him before, kind of step up, like, this is how the Lord will know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, and it was not my idea. If these men die a natural death and suffer the fate of all mankind, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about something totally new, the earth opens its mouth and swallows them with everything that belongs to him, and they go down to the realm of the dead, then you will know that these men have treated the Lord with contempt. And kind of linking that to what Craig posted in the chat, is that Moses sees this not so much as a rebellion against himself, but as a rebellion against God, right? Isn't, and then we see this in verse 8 when Moses responds to Korah, isn't it enough for you that the God, now listen, you Levites, isn't it enough that the God of Israel separated you from the rest of the Israelite community and brought you near to do the work at the Lord's tabernacle, to stand before the community and minister to them? He has brought you and all your fellow Levites near him, but now you're trying to get the priesthood too. It is against the Lord that you and all your followers have banded together. Who is Aaron that you should grumble against him? So I think, talking about the idea that this is nature that did it, I think it's very interesting because you're right, God doesn't specifically command it. Moses says, if the Lord is with me, let this happen.
Yeah, but I still in 23, the Lord is saying, move the rest of fine, I won't destroy the whole congregation. Move the rest of them away from these people because I am going to destroy these people. So it's clear that the Lord is making that this is not some random thing, and that when Moses speaks, he's saying that the Lord is going to use the earth to do this. And that's the specifics that you will know. But, I don't think there's any way to interpret this that it is not God that causes their, to do that. That's specifically what Moses forward as the test. But even before Moses does that, God has already said that he's going to destroy. It's actually Moses that is limiting the destruction, and kind of saying, like proposing a different way for it to happen. Although, Korah is destroyed by being swallowed in the earth, and then the fire goes out from the Lord and burns everyone else up that he was going to destroy. It's just that he's acceded to Moses and not destroying the entire congregation, but having them move away from them, and so I don't know if part of this is because in this instance, as opposed to the flood, that part of the issue is to reinforce Moses's authority as being like unto God's authority. And so Moses has a greater part in dictating how, who's going to be destroyed and how, and who's going to be saved.
The only thing, Wade, I'd say about, I appreciate everything you said. The only thing I would push back on is you at the beginning said, I don't think there's any way to interpret this that it isn't God. And I don't agree with that. I think that there are ways to read this text that it isn't God. But I agree with everything else you say. But I do think that there is room to read this, that God is not doing this in the same way that the fire from God goes out and devours them. So that would be the only thing. I'm always nervous whenever I or anyone else says there's no way to read it another way.
Right. I guess I wasn't trying to preclude multiple interpretations. I was just saying that
you're just rejecting mine.
When you read all of the text and what God says before this, and what Moses's intent seems to be, is that none of the people in the text seem to take it as, oh, this was complete coincidence and this was someone other than God, or this was Moses's doing and not God's doing. That there's no other actor that could be responsible for this. And I guess I just don't see in the text the earth itself being given agency here apart from God.
Well, the earth is given agency all throughout Scripture, whether it be that the earth would vomit them out of the promised land, the earth swallows them. In Jewish tradition and writings, the earth is given agency, which I would imagine that sages and rabbis looking at global warming would argue that the earth is spitting out humanity right now. That the earth is fighting against, because God makes a covenant not just with Israel and all the people of the earth, but God in Genesis 6, I believe, also makes a covenant with the earth, which seems to imply that there is some autonomy that exists in all the creatures on the earth and humans. And so throughout scripture, the earth is actually given autonomy. And I think in some ways that plays into the idea of gods of the different areas and stuff, or Mother Nature, whatever language we use. So there is quite a bit of autonomy given to the text. So in the same way that you could argue that Moses won the battle by holding up the staff, and every time he lowered the staff, they would lose the battle. So did Moses do that, or did God do that? Well, it seems to be impacted directly by Moses's autonomy to be able to hold up the staff versus not be able to hold up the staff, to which God then reacts. And so I think we have something similar here with the earth, that yes, of course, God is involved in some way, but there is an autonomy that exists with the earth that is unique in this story from pretty much just a handful of places. Dad, hey. That
I guess I was just reading when Moses said that God will do a new thing, that Moses is giving saying that this is something that God is doing in opening up the earth. So I was just saying, in this context, it seems everyone is understanding the earth as being a tool of God rather than something that is coincidental or acting independently.
Well, like I said, I think we agree, Wade. I think that my point kind of is that we don't tend to take the autonomy away from Moses when God works through Moses, right? My animals. So, hey, guys, find something else to do. Not you guys, just my dogs. So I was just thinking that, like, whenever a miracle is done through someone, whether it's the outstretching of Moses's staff over the Red Sea, that the Red Sea is parted, we don't, or touching the Nile with the staff and turning it to blood, we don't tend to strip the autonomy away from Moses in those stories. And I think it's an interesting piece for us to consider. Why is the earth acting in autonomy or in coordination with God in this instance? Because why is the earth offended by Korah? Why is the earth now, like, we can argue why the temple or the tabernacle or the altar is offended if we were to give it anthropomorphic features, right? We can argue why those things are offended by Korah's followers offering incense, and so it retaliates against it. So what is it that Korah and Korah's anger, frustration, questioning of Moses, questioning of God, is it that causes the earth to respond? And I realize this is an atypical approach to the way we Westerners read something and ask these questions, but in the other instances where God lashes out, especially using the sea or using other things, there's a much more direct interaction with it than in this moment. And so I think it's interesting and worth us pondering how Korah's frustration and Korah's questioning of Moses is a direct affront to the earth. And so the earth then participates in exacting judgment. So anyhow, I just think it's worth us pondering. I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on it, Lee.
This was a little bit different than my initial response to Wade. Like, is this, something that God wants? And part of me is kind of seeing it like where Moses promises something on God's behalf, and God's like, that wasn't what I was gonna do, but I guess I'll follow through. So, since you said I would do this,
Well, you remember the rabbinic story, don't you, Lee, of the rabbi who he's running late. He has all of his disciples with him, and someone says, my daughter is ill, and the rabbi, without even encountering God, says, your daughter's healed. And then God tears open the sky and says, because it's you, I'm going to do it. But since you didn't ask me first, you no longer have a place in the world to come. And this soon happens to Moses. He no longer has a place in the promised land. And the rabbi starts dancing and crying. And when his disciples asks, why are you happy? He says, because now for the rest of my life, I will know that I'm doing things for the right reason, and not just so I have a place in the world to come. Anyhow, so your point about Moses puts God on the spot here is really interesting.
Well, you two were going back and forth, and I was like, okay. I was like, I'll just let this play out. But weren't we trying to answer a question that you had, Don?
Why is the earth injecting itself or inserting itself in this
Yeah,
interesting moment of judgment?
Oh yeah, and what does Korah do that the earth finds offensive enough to participate in this and be like, okay, yeah. Yeah, and then I guess, my answer would be kind of just what I played on, which is, Moses is like, Moses just takes initiative, and then they're like, okay, guess we'll follow through. So, and they kind of just get put on the spot, and they're like, dang it, like, this is not a good situation for us. But anyway, so that's part of what I see. And I mean, I think it's interesting, this is coming to me in the moment, interesting way that the earth might be participating is because if Moses and Aaron being elevated is the hierarchy that God set up, and Korah is rebelling against God's hierarchy, like, I don't think the earth would be happy. Like, going kind of back to your point about the earth now, like, the earth is still a participant in creation and has a place. And if people are trying to upspur God's hierarchy and how God envisions, leadership, then it's probably not going to go well for the people under the people, if they were to end up under the rebels' leadership. Like, are the people in power now, would they be ones that God would put in power? Are they fulfilling the leadership that God asks of humans, right? This idea that we take care of the earth and each other and animals. So that, on some way would Korah's leadership being against the divine plan be something dangerous for the earth itself? And I think this goes back to part of what people were saying, like, so Korah kind of comes in with two different complaints, like, the whole community is holy, why do you set yourself apart? And and then some of Korah's co-conspirators, Dathan and Abiram, they're like, why did you, isn't it enough that you brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness? And now you also want to lord it over us? And just this idea that I think this rebellion with Korah pulls along a lot of prior portions, like, this idea, and that we didn't talk about this the other week, but that the spies into the promised land, that again, it's kind of like an idea of the people, and God's like, if that's what you want to do, you can. And then they use that as an opportunity to, in some ways, rebel against God, because they say, God, you cannot deliver us into the promised land. These people are too powerful for us and too powerful for you. And again, in some ways, not trusting the agency of the land. And so, yeah, all that to say, maybe the land participates because they see that think like, they are not respecting God, and that in turn they will not respect the land.
I think there's also a very like literal metaphor here that Korah accuses Moses of putting himself above everyone. And so the earth puts Korah below everyone, literally.
I love
And,
that.
and so I think also, back at creation, where man is, after the fall, man is put over the earth and all in it. And so in some ways putting Korah and even their idea of Sheol being below the earth is saying, that it's kind of no longer part of creation. That you've been removed from your spot that other men occupy. Oh, I'm always Mr. Metaphor. I'm Mr. Extended Metaphor till it breaks.
I'm going to leave that metaphor alone.
So does anyone who has not spoken, do they have any input or any questions? Like,
They're not here, Lee.
but there's like, Tally's been quiet. I don't think David's made much input. We've heard very little from Mitch and Amanda. Is Sue still here? Gosh dang it. Because I figure I'd just open the floor because this is kind of like every now and then Don, like sometimes when I'm teaching, Don like asks us a question, I can weave it into whatever I'm saying. And then some days I get distracted answering his question and I just kind of, whatever I was sort of planning just kind of goes by the wayside.
I'm sorry.
And this is one of those days. So I was like, let's see what other, it's okay, Don, it's still interesting and stimulating and I don't mind. But I was just wondering if anyone else had any questions since, I feel like Don and Wade have been hogging the floor.
That was good and not passive aggressive at all. That was just straight aggressive. So thank you.
You're welcome. That's what I try and go for. Well, looks like no one else has anything they would like to share at the moment. So I guess we'll just continue on this. So one of the things I was thinking about this portion, and since we kind of just got completely off the rails, is that talking in mentioned before, is I find this interesting, this interaction with Korah, because Korah brings up things that have occurred in prior portions and in ways that we haven't really discussed, like talking about, well, I say Korah and sometimes I mean just Korah and his two associates, Dathan and Abraham, and just this idea that it's like in their complaint about coming out of the promised land, it's like, well, you were, I think you have one too many hyphens there, BEA. Oh no, that would work. Okay, sorry, sidetracked by the comments. So God it was not God's instruction for them to send in spies to scope out the land, that was something they did on their own initiative, and that then they come back and complain against God, which they've done a lot, and that because of that, then they don't trust God and go against this order or plan of God's, and then get barred from the land because of their own actions. And then they decide to go up into the land, and God's like, that's not gonna go well for you, and they do it anyway. And then they seem to lay the blame of all of this at the feet of Moses. And part of me feels like some of these people who are complaining and comparing themselves to Moses, that they seem to lack a bit of self-reflection or self-awareness of their role in some of these actions. And part of my thoughts stretch back to when we talked about Miriam and Aaron gossiping against Moses, right? So we see that Miriam was like, you have a Cushite wife, and and talking about there's a lot going on there that the text doesn't mention, and she gossips against Moses. And the idea, like, the idea is like, we are also, me and Aaron are also prophets. Why are you different from us? In a way, I hear an echo in this portion, like, we are also holy. Why are you raised above us, Moses? And part of me wonders about the long-term implications of gossip, that if people who are in positions of power and authority and influence, like Miriam and Aaron, if they start gossiping against those who are above them, how does that impact the rest of the community, right? And we see this power of evil talk in the promised land, right? Because, or with regarding entering the promised land, because the people talk amongst themselves and they are swayed by certain views, and that negative talk, that evil talk, ends them up in a worse situation, and is part of the reason Korah and the other people feel comfortable going against God, is that because, or going against Moses, and in that way challenging God, is it because they've seen that Miriam was able to do it with minimal harm, that they were able to question God's plans with the promised land and still mostly come out all right. And is part of the reason why we see such a severe reaction in this portion, because there's the need to kind of like really put a foot down or something, to see like, this is like, to say that now is that gossip has gone so far to lead, that evil talk has now led to deep evil actions, and has in trying to root out what that's caused.
Go ahead,
Maybe
Wade.
we can start using Cora instead of Karen, because Cora demands to see the manager.
Cora's the male Karen.
I was wondering, may this have, I know the way we study and teach and read the Bible is like left to right. It'd be interesting to do it backwards and see if this is something that informed the way they responded to different things that Moses did, or authority that Moses had going forward. Just thought about something like that.
Yeah, overall I think that's a good question, right? And I think part of something I wrestle with is my familiarity with the Torah, and that, right, like I've tried to refer to prior portions, and is my knowledge of prior portions solid and consistent enough that I can see echoes of them in later portions? And like, will I be aware of hearing echoes of this portion in later ones, or seeing how it affects it? And overall, that's part of what I like about how we do church and how we do study, like even like those quadrants that Don uses, like the idea of imagery, like is there imagery here that we see other places, and making those connections, and use an idea of first word use, like some of the words that might be significant in this, like I'd started off talking about the incense, so like these words sanctified, and incense and consume, like where, like seeing that those connected with the prior portion, but where were they first used? Yeah, and part of why I like doing this in a group is because this way I have other people who will notice references and imagery and words that I won't, and that I can, the idea that, as Don says, we are wiser together than we are individually. Is that kind of an answer to your question? Or a good response? Okay, good enough. But to kind of bring it back to one of the things I was trying to say, is that, does Korah's, view change depending on who he compares himself to. Is he overlooking the responsibility and the power and authority and influence he has as a Levite because he's comparing himself to the upper Levites and to the priesthood? Like he's not a descendant of Aaron, or but one of the other people takes care of the tabernacle. So is he comparing himself to people that are like so-called above him, instead of looking at those who don't have what he has and being grateful for what he is and where he is? And like part of the people he hooks up with, Dathan and Abiram, are Reubenites, and in some of the midrash or surrounding this is this idea that part of why they were complaining is because Reuben is the firstborn of Israel, and that they should be the ones who are priests because they are the firstborns. And which is, I guess, we've talked about before, like, why is it the Levites that end up being the priests? But so like Korah ends up with these people that he's in some way his conspirators feel that Korah is taking responsibility or power away from their tribe, and instead of Korah being like, look, this is just how God did it, I try to do this for the best of the people, what Korah does is look at the people who have more power than him and says, why am I not as powerful as they are? And and while I think Korah uses terms that don't say that explicitly, like, isn't the all of Israel holy? And it's like, yes, but that doesn't, like, is Israel, can they have a horizontal leadership and do that successfully? And
I'd like to interject something here. I think one of the problems the Korah and the Reubenites had is that they have a really bad understanding of what leadership is all about. They're looking at status, okay? And with Moses, it was not about status. It says earlier in the Torah, actually in Numbers, that he was the most humble man on the face of the earth. All right, we've already seen demonstrated in Moses that he had a heart for the oppressed. It goes all the way back to Exodus when he murdered the Egyptian because of what he was doing to his countrymen. And God even recognized the fact, even after murdering somebody, that he had the leadership qualities that would allow him to lead Israel out of Egypt and into eventually the promised land. And basically he faces the problem any prophet has always faced in Israel, is that the fact that no one wants to recognize the fact that they are just mouthpieces of God. That's all they are. All right. So Moses doesn't have power in and of himself. His power basically comes because it was directed by God. He was appointed by God. And so they're looking for status. They're really not looking at really what it means to be a true leader of this nation. That's it, and I'll shut up.
Yeah. Yep. I like Don's point in the comments. Yeah, and I like Mitch's point as well. And that was, I think, something I was hoping to spend more time with, is that what does it mean to be a leader, and what does God look for in leadership? And one of the articles I read was this idea of leadership being made of power and influence, and this idea that power is zero sum, that if I'm giving away my power, it lessens my own power. But if I share my influence, I still have just as much influence, in ways that if I share my influence with others, that in some ways I actually gain more influence because my network is now larger. And that Moses is very influential, and what Korah was looking for was more power and authority without the responsibility. Is there any other comments or contributions people would like to make before we close out this part of the service? Back to the earth, Don. You're really championing the earth today. So yeah, so I hope this left you with some questions. I think I'm more confused about this portion than when I came in, which is not a bad thing. Part of me, like, when I first started teaching, or like anytime I would end up teaching, every now and then, I would like always want to run like almost my entire teaching plan through Don, because he would ask a ton of questions and just bring up things I didn't think about. And finally got to the, and then Don, Don tried to get me to like, just be able to do it without him and not need his approval and influence for everything. And now I just find that instead of me asking Don, or Don asking me all my questions one-on-one, he just asks all the questions he has in my service, and I just feel very put on the spot. It's like some days this feels like a discipleship show than like me teaching. So
Lee, I am so sorry. Seriously. I want to be very serious for a moment. I apologize for that. That is never my intention, and I respect your teaching greatly. It's hard in my role because I do have questions, and I do want your thoughts and your ideas on them. And it's not meant for me to put myself above you. And I just want to make sure everyone in this meeting understands that that's, whether it's Lee teaching or anyone else teaching, that's never my intention. So I truly apologize.
no, I think I think it's kind of, I think it can be interesting, and I think for the most part I don't think you need to apologize to me. Like, maybe we should check with everyone else if they feel like they need an apology, and because they can't get a word in edgewise between us. Okay. So, thanks, Wade. That's nice input. I shouldn't be so egotistical to think that you're asking me questions, Don. Obviously, you're asking them to everyone. Yeah, no, and so some weeks it works better, and sometimes it doesn't, and just no. And part of my own insecurity, I'm just like, Lee, why didn't you think of that? Like, why didn't you consider that point of view? And it's anyhow, and part of why I even bring it up is that from my reading and learning about this portion, this idea of like a position of authority and leadership, like this idea of power that is zero sum, that if you give me power, then you have less, or if I give power away, I have less power, and the idea of influence, and that I see a lot of influence go back and forth but in this discussion, that we influence each other and we influence the listeners, and that brings a lot more wholeness to the conversation. And right, and that, like, in the comments, Craig mentioned like he wasn't really sure he wanted to be an elder because it's that idea of power. And that I'm going to use this to transition into announcements, by the way, to segue into announcements. And that's something I've liked about our new board, is it shows, and about our boards in general, is that it's about people who have influence in the community, and that everyone in this community is influential. And I cannot imagine anyone in this community who would be a poor elder, who would not be good enough to be an elder, because we are all focused on the influence and being willing to share our position of authority and leadership and recognize the servant aspect of it. And then when we're put in positions of power, we realize that that it's a way to honor a person, and that our power is in some ways derived from the community respecting us. Yeah, and I don't mind being questioned, because then part of me is also like, okay, what's a better question I can ask about this? But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked by the comments again. So
can I ask you a question, Lee? Would you make the trade?
Yes.
There it is.
Why don't you ask Don that?
Because Don will wax philosophical for like a half hour. We ain't got that kind of time nowadays.
Anyway, so I guess that's all I have for today. So sorry if there wasn't something more coherent to take away. And if you some days think I could probably do a better job than Lee, you should let me know so that I can add you to the teaching schedule, because I would be so happy to share my influence and power with others. Craig, it looked like you were about to volunteer to teach. But anyway, if we want to,
I'm sure it did.
if we want to pause the recording, we'll go on to announcements and prayer requests.